Okay, so while you're doing that, I'll send out the invitations.
Okay, we are live.
I switched to another user, so the user on this.
Thumbs down. Just need to start with some administration. We discovered today that we have a slight problem for September's meeting and potentially October's meeting. Oanda, our lovely host here, is going to be doing some renovations to half the office at a time, and this will all be completely sealed off, as well as the kitchen, which was my backup plan. So we do not have a venue for September.
So I would say, if this many people, we can bridge. A lot of people can.
The thing is, it's going to be the lightning talks, which is probably the single most attended meeting of the year. So I'm going to be putting this out on the mailing list and fire it out through meetup.com. If anyone knows of another venue that they can offer, we're all ears because we're going to need it.
That big share with Mars.
You got to pay for them in Mars.
Mars is expensive.
Yeah.
OICR would does have space. It's providing work there. But you could try. It's on mailing list.
John McDonald's there still, right?
Yeah. It's like they have a business side. You can ask in one place.
Heard Lincoln Stein like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Could ask him.
He's still. He'll probably coding it at 2 a.m.
Lincoln Steins lives here?
Doesn't he work at OICR? Yeah.
Yeah, he moved here permanently now. Yeah.
Oh, I spoke to him on the phone once.
Yes. He's unusual.
I was doing work actually for his brother at the time.
Right.
Anyhow, I guess first we're going to go with Doug Hoyte, who's going to be talking to us about Electron, GitHub's native GUI framework, and his Perl wrapper around it, Valence. Take it away.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
I think you still need to. Have you shared your screen?
Oh,
Yep.
Okay, well, I got it here. So.
You're seeing it? Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay, cool, yeah. So, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Atom editor. It's this editor, like a text editor created by GitHub, and it's got all kinds of fancy features and looks really pretty and so on. And the technology that they have written it in, which is somewhat novel, is HTML5, CSS, JavaScript. It's essentially like a web app, except they also bundle Chromium, the browser, the open source version of Chrome with it. And the underlying technology used to be called Atom Shell, but now they've renamed it to Electron. And this is their homepage, and it looks pretty fancy. They've got all the marketing gizmos, and you can see all these big apps that use it. And yeah, the nice thing is that you can just install Electron, in this case it's NPM, and it just downloads the binary, and then from there you can actually just open Windows and do all kinds of cool stuff that I'll show you in a second. So what I did was the way that Electron works is it has a Node.js process as well as a Chromium process, and you write your application in the Node process for the most part, and it sends messages over to the Chromium process to display things. I wanted to actually write in Perl other than JavaScript, and there's also a few other reasons why you want to do this that I've described here in the rationale. The main one, of course, is that you might not want to write your application in JavaScript. Perl it has a lot of strengths, for example, DI and so on, that isn't necessarily there in JavaScript. And secondly, if you have an asynchronous application, because almost all GUI stuff, including this, is done with asynchronous APIs, then it's really easy to plug in the Electron and Valence framework into your existing application. And then finally, even if you do want to use JavaScript, depending on the exact version of Node, actually IO.js that they bundle is sometimes problematic because you might have native modules that are compiled against the old version of Node on your system, and you have to recompile everything for their IO.js, which is always changing every Electron release and so on. So there's a lot of advantages of having this sort of connected system here, where you've got your app that talks over standard I/O to the Valence.js, which is this JavaScript sort of glue thing that I've created, and that talks to Chromium. And yeah, so this documentation documents the JavaScript interface, but you don't really interact with that directly with the Perl programmer. Instead, I have this perl module called Valence. It's on CPAN. And essentially all I have to do is CPAN emit, or install via CPAN, and it'll download about 30 so megabytes or something like that, which includes the electron binary. And then after that, you're pretty much good to go. So honestly, I'm just going to copy paste the hello world synopsis here into a file. There we go. So yeah, basically you can see all it's really doing here is it uses the module, and then it creates a context by calling Valence new, and that gives it access to the Valence.js process that's running in Node. And then really all it does is wrap the protocol and forward your method calls. So in this case, if you call the require method on V, it's going to create a message, send it over stdio to the valence.js, and then electron is going to kick in and process your request. So here you basically, all you're doing is saying require the app, which is sort of like JS. In JavaScript, there's require, which is kind of like Perl's require or use, and it like loads a module, right? In this case, I'm just going to require app, and then you say, and then when it's ready, on the ready event, when that app is going to fire, call this callback, and then the next thing is it just enters into the event loop we run. And if you're familiar with any event and asynchronous programming, really all that is just like blocking out a condition variable. It's just entering the event loop so that further events can run. So then, once the window is actually opened and it's ready, then this ready event fires, and then all we have to do is create a window object by calling require browser window, and then calling the constructor on new. And the thing is that even though this is Perl code, it's really kind of forwarding all it's proxying all of its method calls to the JavaScript instance of Electron. So and then the constructor also takes arguments like width, height, and the title of the window. And then once we have this window object, we can call other methods. Like the most important one is probably load URL, right? And the thing to remember that is since Electron is really just a browser, you can load any kind of URL browser can load, right? In this case, I'm using a data URI, right? So it's just the content is actually embedded here, hello world. But it says in the synopsis, you can use file or HTTPS or whatever you want, anything your browser supports. So yeah, so let's just run this and see what happens. Oops. Save it. And then bam. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of a little bit small right now, but I have this window, and it's not really. It is a browser underneath, but you can't really tell it's a browser, right? Like for example, if I go into here, it doesn't actually have an icon, right? It's got no icon. Also, the title is there at the top. There's not really anything to suggest that this is a browser. Even if I right-click or hit F12 or any of these things, nothing that a browser would normally do. It's just a blank, empty canvas ready for you to do whatever you want with it, right? And then the neat thing is that it sort of interacts with Perl, right? So any kind of asynchronous events that trigger in the browser context, you can access the Perl, right? So the first thing is if I close this window, it throws this kind of error, right? It's not good per se, right? And that's because Electron shut down, closed the pipe ungracefully, etc. A better way to handle that is to actually go main window on close. We're going to call just a sub that quickly exits. Boom. And then when I close this window, it exits nicely, right? And that's because I installed an event in the Electron and for the close method. And then when that close method is fired in Electron, it sends a message over the connection to the Valence process saying that the window has closed. And then at that point, the callback is run and it exits the program. And it's nice. And of course, you can also, there's a whole bunch of other events. You can go and look at the Electron documentation if you want. But there's like this, right? Like focusing is when a window comes into the foreground, right? So you can see it printed it over here, right? And if I Alt-Tab back to here and then go back to the window, it focuses it again, right? And every time the window is focused, that event's going to fire. And there's all kinds of other different events, but some of the most important are ways to actually just send messages back and forth to Perl, right? So yeah, really, so that's the kind of meat of it. There's more information in the documentation. The last thing I really want to show is just this sort of example sort of thing I whipped up just a little bit ago, last night and mostly. So yeah, it's a really simple thing. It's
Not sure it worked today, is what you're saying.
no, of course not. So really, it's just kind of like a client for DBI, right? DBI is just the database interface, and it connects to any kind of database, SQLite, Postgres, what have you, and allows you to interact with it. So really, all I did was whip up a very simple interface between this Perl script, which does basic DBI stuff, and Valence. So I'll just quickly walk through the Perl here. It's a command line. Actually, no. Why don't I show it first? So all you have to do is go Perl DBI client, run it, and it needs a connect string as the first argument. Right. So I did already create this database. So I'm going to go like this, and it's going to open this. And actually, I kind of anticipated that it might be hard to see this a little bit, so I added zooming in capabilities to this.
Nice.
So yeah, and that's all with JavaScript, right? Like I just use the zoom. I don't know. I copy pasted it on Stack Overflow basically, but there's like a way to zoom the page in JavaScript. So I just added a key press event to that. So then so DB browser is essentially all it does is accept this thing I type in here, and it's going to send that over to Perl. Perl's going to plug it into DBI and then get the results and extract it. So I can go select one, and there we go. There's that is valid SQL actually. It just selects the number one. And then if there's other things like if I enter a bag query, it runs it, and that's the actual error from DBI, right? Can prepare blah blah blah. But the other thing, the more legitimate, is to actually run a real query. Select star from users. I created a users table. Oh, sorry. Users probably. Yeah. So yeah, there we go. It's just a very simple rendering of a very simple SQL browser, and there's you can refresh this. Boom, like there's that, and that actually did a message back to Valence there. And to prove that, I'll just go, SQLite temp junk, insert into user name value. Give me a Sylvester. Values right, and then if I go refresh, there's Sylvester, right? And none of these other queries are impacted.
So does it always append to the page?
It's sort of like the reverse appending, like blog style. The newest is the top. It's like it's just appending into this document. And I'll show you I actually wrote this with React. And I'll show you in a second if you care, but it's pretty straightforward for the most part. So another kind of thing is you see how I added an icon. There's this DB icon, and that's what the browser that's what it is, DB browser. I just quickly made that in the GIMP or whatever, and it's just a PNG file. And all you have to do is to do that, all you have to do is pass in this icon parameter. When you create the window, right? And you can have all kinds of windows. You can have multiple different windows all in the same app. There's tons of different things you can do. There's a better desktop integration. Like you can make it like on Mac, your icon like bounces a little bit where there's a notification. On Windows and Linux, that you can have like little badge numbers on icons that show how many notifications there are. Basically, almost anything with a native cap can do, they've added integrations that you can do with Electron. It's really cool. And yeah, that's basically all there is to the code. It's just really simple. So yeah, the other thing I did is see this. You can't hit F12 to open DevTools. So the only other one other thing I added was just this thing. If you go DevTools, set the DevTools environment variable when it starts. It opens DevTools on the side here, so you can do all the development you want, right? It's quite handy for that, for debugging. And another thing that's handy for debugging is this environment variable called Valence debug that's part of Valence. And if you run that, essentially it shows you the like the wire protocol basically that's that's going on between your process and the Electron process, right? So at Valence it sends, here's the require call that we did. We said call method require and save it into this slot 1, the args app, and then sends a bunch of other things. And eventually Electron's going to say, that callback that you stored in slot 1, well, guess what? It triggered, and here, there's no arguments, right? Because there was nothing in return from that require. Sorry, that on ready callback, I guess. Was it ready? Yeah. And then here's when we create the window. It calls new browser window was something we required earlier. So yeah, it's kind of hard tracking this down, but it's quite useful when you're developing at least. And then that's basically it. I'll quickly just show you the React application I wrote if you care. It's I just using React and the JSX transformer and then some CSS styles. And then really all the body is just this query interface. And then the rest is all just the rest is all JavaScript. So yeah, I'm using useStrict, which is something kind of interesting if you're familiar with JavaScript. They've copied the Perl way of doing it, where there's the not strict version by default, but if you go useStrict at the top, it puts on a bunch of extra stuff. And then JSX is it's like a pre-processed version of JavaScript, and I'll show the details in a second. But the main thing is that you can use like XML-y kind of stuff inside your JavaScript. Yeah, it's something for React. It like adds a nicer syntax to React, basically. Yeah. Sorry, I should explain that. And then here's just some stuff I copy pasted in to add the zooming features. And then this is the actual requiring IPC. That's this is part of Electron, and this is inter-process communication. It's the object that you use to communicate back to Perl. And then I add and then I just create a bunch of React classes. The top of one is the query interface, and this is really all the state there is. There's queries, and then there's the next query key. The next key or ID of the query that will become next. And then this is just the component did mount method of a React object. It's just a thing that's fired as soon as it's mounted into the page, into the DOM. And this just sets up an IPC handler, right? When I get a query result back from Perl, do this, right? And I essentially just set a new state, right? And then on new query, this is a callback. Refresh query, they're all quite similar. They're all callbacks. And then render is the main function. So here's the JSX kind of aspect. In JSX, you can just return HTML basically, right? And it's actually pre-processed and turned into React calls. It's not like a string templating system exactly. And then here I'm just returning the main query interface. And then I'm saying add the query input and all these query nodes, which are more React objects. And then it's really just query input is another React class, and so is the query result, and then there's also a result table. And I just construct the table here. It's quite simple like that. And that's really all there is to it. Actually, I guess I didn't really show all of the Perl though. At the very bottom, there's actually the where it does it, right? It basically says on new query. When we get this new query event from from Electron, from our React application, then we prepare the query, and if there is an error preparing, we send that. We execute the query. If there's an error executing, we send that. And then otherwise, we just send the query results, as well as the column names, which are quite easy to get with DBI. It's really nice. And then the rows, and that's the entirety of the application. And one thing you might have noticed here is that I said everything was asynchronous, but of course DBI calls it blocking. Like if this is a huge mega query, this Perl application might be still blocking on the DBI request file. But fortunately, Valence is an any event application, so you could use any event DBI or any event task or pretty much any asynchronous library with this if you want, with some very minor alterations. And that's basically my presentation. Thank you for listening. And of course, it's on CPAN. The module name is Valence. and the JavaScript library and the Perl stuff are also on my GitHub, the Hoyte. Thank you very much. Any questions?
What exactly is the application area? What does this give you?
So the question is, what does this give you? I guess as opposed to standard GUI toolkits like C++ GUI toolkits and things, or
Oh, so it's a GUI toolkit.
yeah. So it's a way to make like GUI applications. I mean, and I'm putting air quotes around GUI there, because they're essentially programmed like web applications. But the look and the feel, and as well as the integration, is similar to a native GUI application, like something that you might download and executable and run. So it really lets you. The thing that's attractive for me about it is that you can take all of the existing skills that you've learned building web pages and basically make a native application really easily out of that. So yeah, it's got a lot of applications, but I think making it easier to program GUIs is one. Also taking existing components that live in websites and putting them into GUIs is another. Just any kind of quick interface you want in a program. You can easily spin this up and have a nice kind of interface.
You can also now leverage all of your previously written code instead of having to rewrite it in Node.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's involved in shipping this as an application?
Well, so I haven't really done that yet, but I mean, like, one thing is if your deployment system is already built on CPAN, you can just depend on Valence, and then you could create like a big carbon bundle or something, and that would also include the electron binaries.
Right.
Because all the only place they're put is in the file share directory of the Perl module. So if you're already CPAN ready for packaging, everything should just work. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
There's a little bit of tiny more work for actually finding your HTML pages and so on, and like you have to use file share dir, I guess, to figure out the path of it. But it should be fairly straightforward. And yeah, the other thing is I've got it working on Linux and Mac, but there's still some bug in Windows that I haven't figured out. But yeah.
That was going to be my question. So Linux and Mac, I don't see a problem. Windows, I needed to hear how you solve that. So
True.
You're in the process of solving that.
Exactly, yeah. And Electron is supported on Windows. I just have this problem on the Perl side. Executing the binaries isn't quite working for some reason.
What about mobile devices?
Good question. Yeah, I don't think mobile devices are quite as well supported by this. The nice thing is though, if you write it in a sort of modular, your HTML in a modular way, you can easily support both a web application and a native application. So you could, expose the application to your mobile clients over a website, and then give your desktop users the native application.
So when are you going to rewrite our web that's package it up so we
Yeah, I don't know. There's lots of applications, and it depends how far you want to take it.
So could you talk about how Valence works under the hood?
Sure, yeah. I can show the JavaScript really quickly. It's actually quite simple. One of my problems with the other sort of solutions to this is that most of them enumerate every possible method, right? So they create, like in Perl, a window object and menu object, all the different methods. They highlight, copy, and paste them, and so on. I didn't want to maintain that. So really, the way it works is that this JavaScript runs inside the electron process. This is Valence.js, and really, it's a very simple proxy. It keeps all references to everything you've referred to from Perl in this big object map, and then essentially all it does is create a standard input and output interface where it speaks JSON. It accepts JSON messages in, and then it prints JSON messages out on standard in and out. And then yeah, for every line, it implements this protocol, and the main things are like command and callback and things like that. That's basically all there is, right? You just say, I want to call this method on this object ID, and take that result and store it in your object map. And then Valence gives the ID of that object in its map back to Perl. so that Perl can refer to values even though it doesn't have them in its memory, right? So it can say create me a browser window, and Electron says, oh, okay, I've now created a browser window object, and I put it in my map, and I stored it with the key 1, and then it sent that message over. Your object is now created in key slot 1 to Perl, and then Perl at that point can say, well, call the method something something on the object in key slot 1, right? So that way, Perl doesn't actually ever have to have the browser window object, which obviously can't be transferred over this JSON interface. So it just works by references like that.
Nice.
So yeah, you can see it's very, very simple. It's, what is it, 100 lines of JavaScript. Yeah, the only thing I want to work on is, the only thing I wasn't able to figure this out is a limitation, in my opinion, in JavaScript. If you want to call a new method on an object, I don't know how to call that from an array, right? Like, call any other method, you can use the apply method. But for the constructor, there's no way I can figure out how to do that new. And all of the hacks in Stack Overflow are really, really bad for this, and I didn't think it was worth it. Especially because most constructors take an object with key values for their arguments. You had a question?
I think you've answered.
Oh, okay, cool.
I wanted to know how the JSON messages were
cool.
back and forth between the processes.
Cool. Good.
Could you apply a degree of indirection to this by putting the arguments in an array and just passing them across the array reference?
You mean this particular fix me? If that would work to fix that? I don't think so. Like, in fact, I think the object is the problem is more at the JavaScript level. It's not really anything to do with the protocol. It's like I have an array here. This is an array. This message arg is an array, right? So how do I apply that array to be the arguments to the constructor?
And isn't a constructor just a function anyway?
No.
It's with a particular kind of like prototype binder.
Yes.
When it's doing new object, what is up?
So I think you can.
Because you don't have to do constructions with new if you don't want. You can make a factory instead and have it return.
So some of those are those are some of the hacks. Okay, that doesn't. Yeah, okay. That's not for new. I don't know. Okay, if it is that simple, send me a patch. But I screwed around with this for an hour and for quite a while, it seemed, and I couldn't get it to work. I tried almost all of these. But yeah, they have custom prototypes and stuff. I don't know. Please send me a pull request to figure out.
Do 1, do 2, do 3, up to do 20.
Yeah, I thought about doing that. Hack. I didn't really feel like polluting my code with that. But yeah,
you don't have to count. You can just do a map and then execute that.
I could do some really evil eval hack maybe, but no, I haven't run into a case where I actually need more than one argument to the constructor, because all of Electron's interfaces take a hash argument as it, right? Like you can see here, even though it takes a bunch, it takes this, an object, a dictionary, so it just needs one object. So it hasn't really been an issue till now. Anyway, I'm over time, but thanks for listening.
Cool. All right. Let's get my screen share going. I got you clicked. You just were looking at Doug.
I was.
Yay.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick intro to Apache Thrift. Some caveats. I just messed around. I have not used this in production, although I know.
Sorry, Dave, are you projecting?
I am not projecting. It would help if I project. Let's try this again. Everyone online can see, but no one in the room can see. All right.
Turn off your mic. speakers? Sorry, both of those. I've already started the loop.
Really good for like for 1960s. So
All right, I understand.
Okay, let's take it as.
Oh, you know what it is? It's the speaker on the. Can we turn speaker off on the projector?
Yeah, it does.
There, I got it turned off. That should do it. Yay.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand. You're okay.
Yeah. Sorry for deafening everyone. Screen share. Oh, nope. Oh, there's a lot of Doug's laptop.
We're not deaf, we're just in a trance.
Okay. Entire screen share. More screen sharing. Okay. Let's try that again. So, as I said, some caveats. I'm not going to cover everything. I know far from everything. I just played around with it. It caught my interest. We apparently use it here at Oanda. I didn't know that until I mentioned it today and said, hey, come on out to our presentations tonight. And I got our architect very interested. And hey, you want to learn Scala? So this should be viewed as a starting point. Doug here has actually done stuff with Thrift and probably knows more than me. And I lifted this presentation heavily from Thrift the Missing Guide because the documentation on the Apache Thrift website is awful. So what is it? Thrift is a cross-platform, cross-language service development framework. Instead of having 20 different REST services and writing a custom client for all of these, Thrift will generate server and client code in, I think at present, on the order of 25 different languages. The client you can just use with a little extra code. The server you just use basically subclass in the case of Perl, or fill in stuff for other languages, and you have a server. There is basically a interface design language that Thrift uses. You are basically defining what the service is, what its methods are, what its types are, what you can do with it with this language. And the Thrift CLI will use that Thrift file to generate all of your servers and clients. Another nice thing about it is Thrift servers are always backwards compatible with clients. So you can upgrade your Thrift, create a new server in the new version of Thrift, or change that server, that you already had in an older version. The old clients will still work. That's a very important aspect of it. Each upgrade, it's kind of built on top of, so it always knows how to talk to itself. So this is a simple Thrift file. I don't define a service here, but you can see some relatively familiar constructs. A struct, for example, and a type def, if you've ever done NEC, will look very, very familiar. You can define enumerations and that sort of thing. So the Thrift file can have comments with just about every, they support just about every language's form of comments, JavaScript, Python, Perl, multi-line or not. Now, one of the keys to Thrift are its basic types. There's a binary type that just lets you put raw unencoded data, unencoded bytes, a Boolean value, signed byte. All of the integers are signed as well. It does not support any unsigned integers because not all languages and platforms support unsigned integers. There's a floating point number for double and encoding agnostic text or binary strings. Everything for your service, your structures begin with those basic types. There are also container types, lists, sets, and maps. Lists are obviously mapped to basically arrays, although they are typed, so you can only have a list of one type of a thing. A set is an unordered set, basically no duplicates, unique elements of a particular type. And you can do a map, or in Perl a hash, which is strictly unique keys only. If you put a repeating key in there, it won't work. In other languages, it's potential to do it. Perl would just collapse it down automatically. And the key and the value, the key is one type, the value is another. Again, you can't switch up all the types.
Diagnostics let you know which of these mistakes you've made? If you made one?
Not even sure. I'm best been playing around with it. I haven't explored all of the error conditions yet, and they are vast. So you can do enumerated types. My example is going to be based off of Twitter, a basic Twitter service. So each tweet can have a type. If it's a tweet, a retweet, a direct message, or a reply. So if you don't specify anything and you just name it, it's going to monotonically increase the actual value that is stored, starting with 0. You can specify another value if you want to have a specific value for your enumerated type. You can specify it in hex. And if you do specify another one after that, it'll just increase by 1. So structs, it's not easy being C. It's familiar and yet not familiar. This is basically how you put more complicated structures together. Every item in a struct, it's essentially a map. It has to have a unique positive integer ID. This is used under the hood by Thrift. You can have required or optional. You don't actually have to specify required or optional, but you can have things that are required or optional. So basically, the format is the integer ID of the particular field, whether it's required or optional. The next one is a basic type or a struct. So you can nest structures. In this case, location is another struct. So I can specify that as the type for this argument, and then the name of it. You can specify default values if you didn't specify it. In this case, I'm using the enumerated type tweet, which will reduce down to 0, and in this case, just a simple string for English, for the language. You can do type defs, just a nice way to label a particular type of field, and you can change its basic type or structure underneath later. Again, you can do type defs on structs. Namespaces for your generated code. For each target that you're going to generate servers and clients for, you can do this namespace statement, and this will basically tell the generator what namespace to put stuff under if that language supports namespaces, which, oh my god, I really hope it does, because what are you doing otherwise? In the case of Perl, you specify it with, all namespaces are specified this way, with periods separating each sub-namespace. In Perl, this would evaluate to : : In Python, it'd be dots. In Java, it'd be something god-awful, I'm sure. You can also do includes. You can have other thrift files where you define basic types, and you can include it into your other thrift file. And the first part of the file name becomes the namespace. That way you can define the same type in your thrift file as these other thrift files, and they won't collide. So it's auto namespace. So if in tweet.thrift there is a tweet struct, you reference it by saying tweet.tweet. You can also define constants. You specify the type, the name, and the value. You can do maps. You can do structs. In the case of a map, you specify it in a very kind of familiar JSON type way. You define exceptions, and when you define the service, you will be able to say this method throws this type of exception. Exceptions are actually just a kind of a special case of structs. They're formatted, all of the fields in an exception are specified exactly the same way as a struct. It's just what the generator does. It will subclass it to kind of a parent class of thrift exceptions. And this is the meat of it. You can define a service this way. Think of it as kind of your header file. This specifies all the methods, what the input values are, and what the return values are, and what exceptions are thrown. So this is the ping method. It returns nothing. Its return type is void. It takes no arguments. Post tweet, it takes one argument, a tweet struct, and it throws the Twitter unavailable exception, and it returns a Boolean whether or not your tweet was posted. So then there's the method search tweets, where you can pass it a query string, and it will return a tweet search result structure. There's also a modifier called one-way. This is basically like a fire and forget method. Your client, when you call a one-way method, will immediately disconnect. It does not wait for anything. It does not wait for any return value. For example, ping, if ping does a lot of work under the hood, which, again, why the hell would ping do that? But if it takes 10 seconds, your client will not continue processing until that ping returns, and even though there's no response. In this case, it will fire the zip event and immediately return. It doesn't matter what happens on the other end, almost like a messaging kind of thing. So once you've got your .thrift file, it's as simple as this: thrift --gen, your whatever language that there are generators installed for, in this case Perl, and specify the thrift file. You can specify other things like paths. Many of the other languages, Perl does not, but many of the other languages, there are kind of additional options. If you just do thrift help, it'll list all the options. They're specified by, it'll be Perl : option : option : option. Basically for other ways of generating servers and clients and additional information inside. The stack, thrift kind of is basically a stack. Thrift itself, the only thing thrift does is that little command that generates stuff. All of the code is, each of the languages have their own server libraries, processors, protocols, transports. They all have common ones. Some are in some languages and not in others. There's quite a few of them. It's really quite the rabbit hole to go down. So the server, there's multiple servers, single-threaded, event-driven. In the example I'm going to show, I'm using the single-process forking server. The processor is generated by thrift. This is the thing that reads from the input and writes to the output. The protocol can be JSON, binary, compact, another couple others. JSON gives you the ability to have JavaScript communicate directly with the thrift service that will respond in kind. Binary seems to be the most common one. This is just another over-the-wire binary protocol. Compact is another version of binary, but smaller. It reduces down, therefore less traffic. And the transport is how you are sending this information. Is it over HTTP, raw TCP with sockets? And all of this is kind of handled when you initialize things. There's a few things you create one, pass it to the next, pass it to the next, pass it to the next. So, so the server, you create a transport, which, as we said, what's your method of sending it. You create a protocol for the transport. You create a processor based on the protocol, and then run the server, and it waits and it hands all of the information to the processor and returns all the information that the processor gives it back. So, let's pray this works. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention, a very nifty thing is, let's actually increase that a little. So, Thrift, as I mentioned, it has a lot of different languages in here. You'll see these are various options. So, for example, you can do C#:async. So it adds particular support for this and that. Most languages seem to have quite a few. Even JavaScript generators have like 3 different options as an option. Perl has none. And I will talk a bit later about what the code is like. One thing I do like, there's an HTML generator. Thrift. When you create it, you can also pass it, tell it where to generate the files. By default, it goes into gen and the language, gen-the language. Twitter HTML. So if you pass HTML as your generator, it will create basically a specification of your service based on the Thrift file, which is really quite handy. So let's see here. I'm going to quickly run. Where did I put it? chmod user client test. So I have a run server here. I've actually used Perl Carton to keep all my modules here. What I'm doing here is I'm including the generated Thrift packages from Perl in Ink, as well as my server implementation in lib. I created a module called Twitter server, and right here I am creating a new version of Twitter server and serving. So if you just run that, please God work. Yay, very complex. Here, oh, I'm going to need a new tab. Dropbox, slides, Thrift, and client test. Now you're going to see some input whiz by on both screens here. And of course I did that too. Unexpected EOF. Oh. Oh. Did you forget it? I forgot a quote. Yeah. So that just fired a whole lot of things there. So I'm going to look at the bottom here, which is the client side. So here I executed the ping method. I posted a tweet, and it was I got back a Boolean 1, which means it worked. And search tweets, I passed a search string yay, and it gave me back a Twitter search result object, which has 2 tweets in there, which are some more objects here. The language, the location, which is like lat long. Tweet number 1, this is tweet type 0, which is just a regular tweet. This is my user ID, my name. And a second one, these were just quickly generated. My server is basically a stub, and it lies every time. It throws stuff back at you. Zip is interesting. I haven't actually figured out why this is. Zip I did not implement. In the interface for the server that is generated by Thrift, there's a nice little thing that just says, die, implement me. So I didn't do that. So my server is falling back to its parent class, and I'm getting back 0 but true. So I haven't figured out why exactly that's happening, but I'll have to take a look at that. So let me go in here. Oh, wow, didn't look just great. Okay, Do that. Top left. So.
DBI also returns 0 but for in most cases.
Does it? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's like this, often you check to see if something succeeded by is it not null, right?
Mm-hmm.
But DBI has legitimate reasons for returning 0 rows, for example.
So this is the auto-generated code by Thrift. Actually, the Twitter.pm, which is the main one, the types and the constants are all separate things. The thing I hate about the code generator, this runs all the way down to Perl 5.6, by the way. Oh, look, it's generated this weird package. I don't need that package. It does weird stuff. I don't need this package. Oh, look, multiple packages in here. None of them actually named Twitter. So it generates a whole lot of code that's kind of a pain in the ass. When you look at it, it's horrible, it's ugly, but this is what code generators get you.
Generating a class endpoint.
Not just a class per endpoint. It's an args endpoint and so one to process the args, one to process the result. Actually, where's my toggle right? Let me see. So one for args result, args result, args result for each method. It generates a Twitter client class. So this is what you use to communicate. You don't have to change much about it. You just have to, you just have to instantiate it and use it really. Although I wrapped it in something. Twitter if, in this case, if is the server class. You notice the client is actually a subclass of the server, the way that goes. And Twitter if is basically the server that you subclass and implement. You'll notice it doesn't actually have a new method. You have to provide your own, which I don't quite understand. So there is no actual instantiation in this. And you can't modify this code, because if you change your Thrift file and regenerate, you wipe this all out, which is why you have to subclass it. Twitter REST I haven't looked at. I believe it's for generating a RESTful API. It also generates types, so these are basically all of your structs end up as classes in here. So the tweet type was actually an enumeration, so an enumeration ends up as a class with constants in Perl. Location is a structure with it generated a simple one with class accessor. Tweet search result is, again, it uses class accessor. Here's my tweet struct with just basic accessors again. Constants. So there was one constant that I never used that was specified in my Thrift file, which was max results. So it just generates an entire separate class for the constants. So my Thrift file for this, so I have an enumeration for tweet type. I have a location, so you can start the latitude and longitude of where the tweet was sent. Here's the tweet itself. A user ID, username, the text of the tweet, the location, the type. And here is the service at the end here, and an exception. So we'll get on to the Twitter server. So the Twitter server, where was it there? There was another thing that it generated that made me cry. The exception. Where's my exception? Types. Twitter unavailable. Yes, here we are. Yay! Multiple inheritance. Because why not? So here's my server. So I have subclassed Twitter if, which is the server class. I originally had done this, use parent, because base is old and parent does things a little less stupid. Except it blows up, because there's something they did in their generated code that I didn't care to figure out, and it made me cry because I can't use modern things. So use Twitter. I didn't namespace mine. I had commented out the namespaces. So it created Twitter, it created types.pm and constants.pm. So namespacing is good because those are horrible, horrible basic names that should, I should have done something like Twitter app, and then you get Twitter app types, Twitter app constants, and Twitter app Twitter. So that kind of thing. So what I've done here is I've subclassed it. In my case, for my new, you can specify the socket that the server is going to run on, or I just default to a particular number. My ping method is just say print ping.
So that data printer call, is that from Thrift? Or?
No, this all here is my code. Twitter if was generated by Thrift, and I've subclassed it to implement the server. So posting a tweet.
That's weird. I thought I had generated tweets.
Oh no, posting a tweet. I basically ignore. You get a tweet over the wire, so you can see when I did this. This is the server still running. So post tweet. This is the tweet that it saw that was passed by the client. And I have a little thing here. Basically, I'm generating a number between 0 and 2. 0 means you failed. That's the result that will get returned. 1 means you succeeded. It's just a Boolean that this returns. However, if I generate 2, I'm going to throw the Twitter unavailable exception. You don't throw it, you return it. So the server should return the exception. And my client will get that instead, and you basically have to examine what you get back. Did you get the object that you expected, or did you get a class of Thrift exception? My search tweets just randomly generates a few tweets and returns them. And here's the bulk of serve. So serve is what's running now. So this Twitter processor was generated by Thrift. You'll notice I didn't use Twitter processor. That's because it's all in Twitter, in the generated Twitter thing, the million packages. So I create a processor. I take that processor and I create a socket, a server socket. I pass those to the forking server, and then I call server. And so this is basically an event loop, and when you escape out of it, it's done. So I also, if something goes wrong, I have a little catch block to catch the exception and throw it out and see what happens there. My Twitter client, where's my Twitter client? So this is my Twitter client wrapper. So I use Thrift and I use Twitter. This, again, Twitter being the thing I did, have to use types because it will not automatically serialize this shit for you. If I return, even though a tweet is really kind of a hash, you have to create an instance of tweet and pass that over the wire pass that to the client, which serializes it and sends it over the wire. So in this case, I've got 2 arguments where you can specify the host and the port of the server. So I have to create a new socket, and I have to create a new transport, in this case a buffer transport. There's all kinds of different ones. Again, you have to make sure your server and your client match up. If you're serving on a socket, you got to communicate on a socket. It's not just going to magically figure it out. You can obviously run multiple versions of it. Multiple versions of a service just by having different options for the server and for the transport and that sort of thing. Just put them on different ports or what have you. In this case, I'm using the binary protocol, which in the server, not sure how I specified the protocol here. I'll have to look into that. Again, I was just playing with this. So in this case, I also have little routines to open and close the transport because that's how they work. On close, on destroy, I close the transport. So then I'm basically just have a thing where I proxy through all of these to the client. So ping, post tweet. I just do a client post tweet. And the tweet that you're passed in, you could probably make this nicer by passing in a hash ref and having that build the object inside your post tweet method. I didn't do that, but I'll show you later there. Again, most of these are just proxies through. So this was my little test, which is what I executed at the command line earlier. I open the transport, I run ping, I run post tweet, and I pass it a new tweet object, which I create here, which also has a location, and I have to use the tweet type. Tweet. You'll notice tweet type is also not imported because it's all in the auto-generated code again, and that's why I hate it. But yeah, that's the basics of it. It goes over the wire. Now, the client is actually very simple. I put a wrapper around it, but you saw really it's just proxying through it. You can use types, and the client's very simple to just fire up and go. I don't have much error checking in mine. You'll notice like I'm not checking for the return object being anything. I just do a print of it when it comes out. So you'll notice on this side, when I did the post tweet, I didn't post the result, but you can see this one actually threw a Twitter unavailable exception when I did that. So. Gotchas. No one signed it. I don't like that. Don't ever modify the generated code because if you generate it again, it's gone. Oops, looks like my slide screwed up a little. There are a variety of servers. You've got to play around to figure out if you're actually running a service off of this. You know, play around with the transports and the server type to make sure you're not overloading and blocking. If you run a threaded server in something like Python, which has the global interpreter lock, guess what? That's not going to be of much use to you because of the global interpreter lock, which completely negates anything that threads by you. There are other servers. For Python, I found a presentation where a guy wrote one that actually gets around the GIL in various ways. The thrift distribution on CPAN, which is the thing that you have to install. You know, you have thrift itself, but you have to install the thrift module from CPAN. The dist is kind of busted. It's auto-generated. Oops, let's kill this server. So you'll note here in my CPAN file, I specified thrift server. That's because if you ask for thrift, you get version 0.8.0. Thrift is currently at version 0.9.0. But because their code on CPAN for all of the servers and such looks just as pretty as the generated code for your client and server, they did not put a version in the thrift package. Therefore, CPAN did not properly index it. And in fact, in the latest version, there is no thrift package. There is a thrift.pm, but inside that, there is no thrift package. It is all other packages. So I'm going to file a nice little bug with the Apache Foundation and say, fix that. You can see I started using parent, and I had to do that now.
Not core.
Not core. Looks like they tried to keep it with core. And that what looks like some of the other generators, the options are for producing clients and servers that use non-core code.
Is this core in 5.6?
God, I hope not. So what sucks? In the interface definition language, you cannot use circular references. You cannot return null. You have to return, your data types. There is no null data type. You cannot return null. You can return an empty string. You can return 0 for an integer, but there are no nulls. There's no inheritance. You can't have like a subclass of a service. You can nest structures deeply, but if you saw in my code, when I created a tweet search result, I had to instantiate a tweet search result. I had to populate that with new instantiations of tweets. And each tweet had to have an instantiation of the location object. It gets rather a pain when you have deeply nested structures because each of those end up being an object.
Davis, does that mean even the types can't be self-referential? Or does it just mean that, I mean, the instances, I can understand instances not being circular, but does it mean you can't actually have, like, you couldn't build a tree type structure in the type model?
If you handle all the IDs and references yourself, I'm sure you could.
Because that would require your types to at least do the consent.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't looked too far into it.
Because that would
I'm a
be,
little scared.
if that's not there, that is a big limitation.
There's also no authentication. So basically, you create these servers. It's on you to put in an authentication mechanism, add a token, and what have you. Now, there are other things around this. This is not like a service-oriented architecture in and of itself. It's just a way to create servers and clients in multiple languages. Didn't say Siri. There are things around this to turn Thrift into part of a service-oriented architecture. Twitter, for example, uses Thrift, and it uses Zookeeper to do that. Scala actually is not one of the explicitly supported languages, but Twitter has its own generator for Scala Thrift services. So you have to make sure you use the right combo of transports for the client and the server. I haven't run into that because I've just been looking at examples, but if you look at the Perl package, there's a number of there's a number of protocols, there's a number of transports, there's a number of servers, and they have to match up. Don't tie the server up. This is blocking. If you do an IO blocking thing, it'll sit there, it'll wait, and you'll run out of workers, and it will just go, nah. The binary protocol seems to be the most widely used, even though there's like the JSON and compact. It seems like the compact protocol has not been implemented in every language, so everyone seems to just use binary from what I can see. I may be wrong on that. What sucks about the Perl? As I mentioned, oh god, the generated code. So you can't use native data structures for anything. Everything's generated in classes. I wish I could do this in Moo or something. I may have to learn C++ just so I can make a contribution to their code generator because it's just awful. You had to use base instead of use parent. It uses some rather anachronistic things. I find it a little bit clunky. I guess it depends. I can see this for something like a Twitter service, it gets complex. Microservices probably is Thrift's real strength. You have an email sending service. It has one method. Here are the headers, the body, the from, the to, the VCC, and CC. You keep it simple. It can be a really nice fire and forget kind of thing. That said, there's other stuff on CPAN outside of just the official Thrift distribution. Thrift parser is actually lets you parse the IDL, and you could potentially build your own generator without contributing directly to Apache Thrift. There are alternate XS versions of some of the servers that they produce. They're pure Perl. The ones they provide, someone has written some XS versions of these servers. And it is interesting. Okay. That's about it. Thanks. This was written using AppRevealup, which makes Markdown into a nice little slide for you automatically so you don't have to write HTML. Any questions?
Still silence.
Dave, well, why did you pick Thrift to look at as opposed to like there's like protocol buffers?
I have used protocol buffers before, and I hated them. Mostly, I hated proto files and all that stuff. I just saw it, and it caught my interest. There are, of course, other alternatives. You have your own protocol, I think you recall.
That's what he was getting at.
But yeah, I saw it because this was not originally Apache's project. This was something Facebook contributed to Apache. They use this internally all over the place, apparently. I appreciated. I looked at this for Perl mongers particularly because, hey, it actually has Perl code generators. It seems like a lot of things that are coming out these days support like 3 languages, and they're not even the same languages. You know, the developers who originally wrote X like Python and Ruby, so there are things for that. The ones that wrote this like Swift and Objective-C, so there's stuff for that. And, this one has a huge volume of supported languages, which I thought was really cool. I mean, obviously something in any company with a diverse group of developers, you end up having a whole lot of languages and having to figure out a whole lot of ways to share information. I know, you know, ending up having to write the same library in different languages is a pain in the ass, and this kind of is one option to avoid that.
You generate the server code. Did it also generate the line code at the same time?
Yes. It always generates both. You don't have to implement the server.
So you could then generate it in a separate language and then use line language server.
Yeah. I was going to actually make a PHP one because I'm a masochist. And but I looked at the PHP code and got horribly confused, and it didn't. My version, it actually uses namespaces in PHP, which they got like 2 years ago. Which, go PHP. And I couldn't get it to work, and I was messing around with the Perl too much. But that was my original intent. But yeah, basically you just implement the server in one and use the client in all the others, even though it creates an interface that you can implement. Like the Java generator, for example, just makes an interface, not a class. So there are gotchas for each other language, how they've chosen to represent the struct in that language and how you interact with it. Like in our case, like I said, it's represented an enum with constants and such, and every language is different, and you've got to find the kind of little esoterica of how it deals with that. So the simpler your interface, the better, because then the less complex stuff you got. Cool. All right.
Our next presenter is actually going to be Alex.
What?
And he's going to present on your laptop, Dave.
What?
Part of my plan to take over the world. What can I say?
Okay.
Starting with Dave Doyle's laptop.
What do you need?
It's got a USB key for
I've got a PDF here.
Oh, okay.
Shouldn't be that much on there. Oh, there we go. FakeTwitter.pdf.
We're going Twitter themed.
Yeah.
One second, let me
I had no idea
turn on
Dave
my
was
screen
going to do a
share.
talk about something Twitter-related.
So let me turn my screen sharing back on. Entire screen.
Even though I'm here.
That was not what I expected you to do. That was not what I expected you to do.
You're on full screen, you gotta go to view.
Really? Why doesn't it follow the insane? Enter full screen. Yay. There you go, Mr. Beamish.
Cool. So I was driving home from Caledon, having dropped off my stepson, and I found myself thinking, what kind of data model would you use to implement Twitter? Oh, right, I'm supposed to start by introducing myself. My name's Alex Beamish.
Bonus talk.
Yeah, bonus talk. So I found myself wondering, what kind of model would you need to implement Twitter? And you've already heard Dave talk about it, which is fascinating because I guess everybody's got a different idea about how to implement it. So I thought, that sounds kind of cool. I want to write it using DBX class because that's kind of fun. And I want to use Modulicious because that's kind of an interesting platform to develop stuff on. So I thought, right, I guess I should have gone to this slide before talking. Anyway, I got some exposure to Catalyst, and Catalyst is very complicated. It's written for people who are brilliant. And I'm not brilliant, so I had a look at Modulicious. I thought, that's great. Modulicious, to my mind, is also similar to Dancer, so I thought, I might as well try Modulicious at Dancer. And a cool idea to write an API and then the web application later. It should be fun. So I'm using SQLite for the database because it's quick. DBAX class, working towards my expert level on this module. I'm still way off. Modulicious Lite. Does anybody here use Catalyst successfully in a development environment?
I've used it. Wouldn't say successful.
Use it for MetaCPAN.
Yeah. Or use it for MetaCPAN?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Even
Cool.
for
Sales thing? Yeah.
Oh, okay. It just got down so many levels and so deep and so confusing. I guess I never really got to the activation. I got enough activation energy to go, okay, I see how this is working now. Anyway, that still may happen with Modulicious, who knows? And testing with TestMore and TestMojo. And test-driven development, which I love doing. So the data models, users because they can exist without tweets, and I think this is where I wanted to get up and draw on the board. And I've not been practicing this presentation for the last week. I ran through it once this afternoon. So you've got users down here, and you've got tweets here, which depend on users. Tweets can't exist without users. And then you have retweets, which are what I model them as kind of tweets that refer to other tweets. And you got multiple retweets pointing back to the tweet. And a retweet, they have text and may not. It was only recently that Twitter added the ability to add text to a retweet. Before then, it was just a little additional whatnot. And then down here, sorry guys behind me. Down here we've got followers, which are, I'm not really remembering my own model very well. Followers, which are users pointing to other users. And then up here, you have favorites, which tie together tweets and users. So that was the way I did my data modeling. And as I developed the class in DBIX class, I wrote tests to go through and make sure things were working properly. So I've got an API so far that just does these three items, which is get a specific user, get a specific tweet, and get the tweets by a specific handle, which is what you look at, what you get when you're looking at your own page. You're just looking at the stuff that you've written. Actually, in Twitter, you also see stuff that you've also retweeted, but that's later. And more to come. And future plans, of course, posting new messages, replies, and how to show them in the timeline. And that's an interesting one because if you've got a series of replies, where do you put it in the timeline? And for me, the answer is you put it where it fits in chronologically where the last reply goes, so that your reply may be from 5 minutes ago, but the original tweet might be from an hour ago. But you want to group them together so you can show them in chronological order, even though what you're seeing in a larger sense is also chronological. Searching and deleting tweets and users, that's just for completeness. And of course, you know, because I've got a little small toy database, I'm thinking I want to pretend I'm using, doing a big implementation, so thinking about sharding all the tables and building a sharding layer. Well, I need to look into that and see how complicated that is. I also had exposure to MongoDB a while ago. I don't know, has anybody here used MongoDB for anything? You've also used it. It might be interesting to try that out and see how that differs. I'm not even sure DBIX class would handle MongoDB. Probably wants a relational database. So
there's a whole bunch of different MongoDB clients.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
anyway, that's something interesting to look at.
You don't actually need it as much with MongoDB because it's document oriented anyway, so you can actually structure the data directly in the database.
Oh, really?
Complex.
Yeah. Anyway, that just struck me as kind of an interesting thing to look into, and I want to try stress testing it. Blasting the database full of stuff and pulling stuff out. That's it. It's kind of a lightning talk, really.
Why are you a masochist?
Why am I a masochist? I wanted to build some piece of technology that I could show up to somebody, so that when they say, "So what code have you written?" I fall back on, I can't show you that because it's proprietary, and I can't show you this because it's proprietary. I wrote this really cool thing, but I can't show you because it's proprietary. So at least this, I can show people that I can say, here's something that I wrote. And show them the code, and they can look at it and they go, wow, that looks pretty complete, and it works, and it's got tests and everything.
I was wondering, if you noticed graph databases cropping up. There's one called Neo4j that possibly a graph database would be suitable for this kind of application, where it's the relationships between things rather than the contents, which are of interest.
Yeah, that could be.
There were some lovely guys at OXCR that were doing MariaDB, if you recall. Or were you here for that?
I think so. All right, I'll do the last presentation of the evening, and I'm actually presenting on the Hangout machine, so it's sometimes gets a bit crazy. Try this. All right. Just try this. Just do the whole thing. No, actually, why don't I show the Hangouts?
Entire screen. Every
Entire
time
screen.
you do other things, it goes bonkers.
Okay, let's try that.
Trust me.
Okay.
Yay.
Yeah. Okay, let me unclick Dave. That's what it is. Here. Oh, yeah, it's gone to a different resolution now.
Yes, it has.
Let me open my PDF. Maybe that'll work better. Okay. There we go. So basically, I just wanted to talk about mocking third-party web services and sometimes even mocking some of your own services. And this really just goes to what makes it easy to test your own applications. The next page here. That's not how I wanted to do this.
Command Control F to get this.
See that. Oh, it looks okay on that Hangout? Okay, cool. Okay, so essentially when we're talking about mocking, it's pretending to be something you're not. And in this case, it's really the kind of mocking that I'm talking about is intercepting network calls to services, generally ones that live outside of your application code. Okay. Good candidates for mocking would be, things outside of your control, like, say, if you're doing, a lot of times, what I'm working with right now is payment systems, so that's sort of what's at the forefront for me. PayPal, AuthorizeNet, Stripe, whatever, like any of those kinds of things. If you're writing a module for CPAN and it's a wrapper around some kind of a third party, like, say, maintain an API for FreshBooks, like those kinds of things are also good candidates for mocking. But you could also mock internal services, things that might be too complex to deploy in your testing environment, or that just actually might be too resource intensive. So if you've sometimes, like, say if you've got something that depends on like machine learning or something, you need to have access to like hundreds of thousands or millions of data points, and you don't want to install that on your Vagrant box or whatever, then mocking some of that stuff is can be actually a good choice. So what this allows you to do is you can now run your tests in airplane mode. So if you can mock out all your internal service or your external services, that means you don't need to make any kind of network calls. And I do actually sometimes work on an airplane. So those sorts of things are important to me. It's super annoying if you can't run your test suite, you're not connected to the internet. It's because it's just relying on something that you have no control over. So the other thing, though, is even when you are connected to the internet, if you're mocking your web services, that means you have less local test failures because there will not be these network failures that you have to make because you're not making calls over the network. The same is true for your continuous integration, because it might be annoying to the people on your team that you've included calls to the PayPal API. There's some interruption somewhere in the network, and now suddenly master looks like it's broken, right? And then on the next build, master it's fine again, and then 5 builds later it's broken. So those kinds of things can be extremely irritating. If you're deploying your code to CPAN, you'll also have less failed builds from CPAN smoke testing. I found that even really trivial stuff that happens on the network can trigger fails in your CPAN builds. And then when you go to check out your stats, you'll see a whole bunch of red boxes. I've got a module called www mechanized cached, and we were just doing really simple things like fetching a Google page or a Wikipedia page and seeing if it was cached. But that's actually really not that simple, because the test would go to fetch. It was like google.com, and then it would check to see if google.com was in the cache. But the problem is, if you're in Germany, it does it like a forwards to google.de, and the caching was actually caching by caching the original request and not the redirection. So it would just think that it wasn't caching. So like just little things like that you don't plan for. So you've got somebody in some other country, they're not actually necessarily going to see the same things that you do. So that is another good case. It's a bit problematic with the caching stuff, but and the other thing is that sometimes you want to simulate various errors. You want to be able to, especially with the payment system, you want to be able to deal with like a 400 or a 500 error, and it can be hard to trigger those otherwise. You can't necessarily tell AuthorizeNet to give you a 500 or something like that, right? Under normal conditions. Other things that you can do then is you can mock, say, failed credit card transactions. Say if you're working with AuthorizeNet, they do have a sandbox that's sort of good for these things, and the general thing here would be try to authorize a credit card for this amount, and this special amount will then trigger a special error message and you get that back. So you definitely can do those things with the sandbox, but you have to rely on the sandbox to be available and to be reliable. And if you've worked with the PayPal sandbox, that's not necessarily the case, right? So, and it can be quite slow even when it is online. So, there are different ways to mock. I'm just going to show you the one way that I like, but at work, for example, we have tried other ways of mocking things, and sometimes it's just essentially writing a wrapper around what's already a wrapper. So if you're using, say, a CPAN module for AuthorizeNet, which is always going to make network calls, you can have your own library that will make the network calls in a production environment, but when you're in a test environment, it actually never creates that AuthorizeNet object. It just pretends that it does and then returns something back. So this is good. This is okay if you were always just say going to return a hash back from the CPAN module. But if it's actually returning back objects, then you've got to mock the objects. And that also means that when the API changes on the CPAN module, your API and your objects may also have to change to reflect that. So you've got to sort of keep up with that, and that can be annoying. So one thing that I found effective is just to use a mocking user agent. This seems to me, for my purposes, to have been the most versatile, and it sort of gives you the most control over the experience. The caveat is that you can only really properly do this with, say, if you're using a CPAN module, a module that allows you to provide the user agent, or otherwise you have to violate the encapsulation of the module. So I'd like to encourage people to, whenever possible, expose their user agents. Most people are of the school of thought that you want to expose as little of your API to as public methods as possible. That gives you the sort of the most control over the experience and the least number of things that you're going to be responsible for. If you make all the methods on your classes public, people are going to start using them in ways you didn't expect. They're going to file bug reports. They're going to expect you to keep up with those as well. So basically, you want to expose as little as possible. And a lot of people sort of extend this down to the user agent level, but there's not really a great argument for doing that, because what you can do is there are so many user agents out there that are classes of, say, subclasses of LWP user agent that basically do the get, post, and put, like, all those basic things, that it's entirely reasonable just to allow people to pass their own, just with some sort of buyer beware kind of an attitude there, that you do something crazy in your user agent and it breaks the module, then the author's not responsible for it. But sort of basically, if you want to do this, just check the class of the object that's provided. So if you're using Moo or Moose, you can just do an ISA. So, for example, if you're saying that the object needs to be an LWP user agent, then also a WW mechanized object will be fine because it just inherits from LWP user agent. You can also sort of inspect the object for the methods. Does it have a get? Does it have a post? If it has these things, then you can accept it as well. So basically, if you allow these things, it allows people who use your module to do three things. They can debug more effectively, they can cache more effectively, and then they can mock effectively as well. For debugging, I've written a module called LWP Console Logger Easy, and basically what that module does is it hooks into some phases that LWP user agent exposes, and every time you do a get or a put or a post, it'll print out the URL you're fetching, it'll print out the headers, it'll print out your cookies, and it'll try and pre-print your data as well. So if it's XML, it'll try and turn that into a hash and display that as well. So it gives you like maximum information about what's going on under the hood. And I found that this is really easy too. Like I was troubleshooting a GitHub API, and I just passed it to user agent that had the debugging enabled, and then it instantly showed me all the stuff that was going on. So you can do this rather than having to go and sprinkle print statements all over the place. If you want to do some user agent caching, there's WW mechanized cached, and then there's also this LWPX user agent cached, which is new, which is based heavily on the mechanized module. It just doesn't have as many dependencies. And then if you want to do some mocking, I would recommend at this point test out WP user agent, which is what I've been using. And basically, it's super exemplar, super easy to use, and this is just a basic example of how you might use it. Basically, you can just map responses to it. So you would just create the new instance, and then you call the map response method. The first argument would be the host name. It's actually a regex that will match like a host name and a path, and then you just give it a response object. So in the first example, when you request success, it's just going to give you the success message, and if you get this failure URL, it's going to do the failure one. So that's obviously a very basic example. And if you're dealing with something really simple, like just a couple URLs and a couple possible responses, then this is a good way to do it. If you're doing something more complex, you could possibly say use a callback or something that implements some kind of logic inside this, but it pretty quickly begins to be a drag if you're going to start inspecting request objects and things like that to try and figure out what's going on under the hood. Like at that point, really what you want to do is use a framework. Luckily, what this module allows you to do is register a PSGI application, and then it'll just forward everything to that. So that's kind of what I want to get into right now. What I've been doing, unfortunately, I'm writing a wrapper for PayPal's Payments Advanced, which is this thing people used like 5 or 10 years ago.
How things have you written a wrapper for it?
Yes, this is the second product, and it's like this crazy thing where you could make some like regular API calls, but they also have hosted forms. So the idea was to reduce like this PCI compliance so that we wouldn't have to deal with the actual credit card number. So we let PayPal host the form. And then we have to do all this stuff around it. But that's when you've got mechanized tests that go like from the start of the purchase process to the end, then it becomes a little bit weird because I've got these robots that have to go through the shopping cart, and then at the point when they want to make a purchase, there's like this PayPal form that gets inserted as an iframe. and then you're supposed to fill that out, and then you come back on the other end. And sort of the way it works is you request a token from PayPal. PayPal gives you the token, then you use that token to construct the URL. Use that URL to construct the iframe. The user fills out the iframe. At the point when there's been like success or failure, PayPal will post back to you, like to a separate endpoint, and then redirect the user back to your site. So you've got this weird thing where you've got a token, and then the user's filled something in. You'd actually have no idea at this point what the user's up to. Then you will get like a success or failure back from PayPal, but it won't be attached to the user, so you don't have the session or anything like that. And then the user will come back to another page which is inside the iframe. Then you have to kind of like bust out of the iframe and hopefully get everything in order. So what I did here was to try and make this stuff as easy as possible. I did a little bit of mocking, and let me just for some reason this is the resolutions. So basically what I did here was I wrote a Modulicious Lite app to simulate the PayPal service. Now this PayPal web service only has one endpoint that you ever post to, and it's actually just like the top level domain. There's no / anything. So basically what I was able to do here is just say anything that gets posted to / you're going to deal with. This line up here, is this still on the? Yeah, that's okay. This line up here is that when PayPal returns your information, it actually uses this special content type that I've never seen anywhere else, which is called text name value. So I just created this new type in Modulicious, and basically all this text name value is that it sends you some key value pairs. It's basically like a URL query string, but it sends it back in the body of the response. So as far as the Modulicious app goes, you just get your context object there, and then I've got a method here that calls filter params. And in this case, what PayPal does is when you send the request to them, you don't send it as a series of key value pairs, really. Like, what you do is you send them some keys, and inside the name of the key, the last characters are like square brackets and a number inside of them. That's actually like the suffix of the key, and that tells you actually how long the value is. Because you can't encode the string, so you basically have to say, this is my key, take the next X characters as a value, then you'll find another key. And so what this here just has to decode that. And then I just inspect the parameters now, and for example, one of these is to create the secure token. And if I see this, then I say, okay, then I know that's what the process is, and then I can just mock a response, and these are the 4 keys that I'll send back. And so for me to get to this point, basically what I did have to do was I actually used the LWP console logger easy to do actual post to the PayPal API, and then just sort of inspect what it gets back and say, well, this is what I could reasonably expect to get back as well. So what they do is you send them a secure token ID, and they echo that token back to you so that you can inspect the response to make sure that it matches up with what you sent. So in this case, I just echo that back as well. A result of 0 actually means success. It always comes with an approved response message, and then they will send you back a new token that you can use. So that's what I've got there. And so as part of the process goes, when the mechanized agent gets to this page, there will be an iframe embedded in the page. It doesn't follow it, but at least this way I can make the call to the PayPal API without things exploding. So I just sort of need to have everything happen like it normally should. And then what I can do is I can mock the PayPal post back to me, because basically I can just construct what I think are like reasonable parameters to get back from PayPal and post those back to my own endpoint. And I've got a sort of another mocking object that does that. And there's another example here where this D transaction type is capturing a delayed transaction, and then I'm just mocking the responses there and returning there. And the next case, say a balance inquiry or transaction inquiry, just doing that. So there's not really a lot of logic going on here. The kind of the weird thing about PayPal is that, or the fun thing is, You actually get, yeah. You're actually posting to two different APIs when you're using this. You're posting to one API to get the tokens, and you're posting to another API to do everything else. So what I do is I've included with this distribution a user agent that's already fully set up for the mocking. So I create two of these apps here, a Payflow Link app and a Payflow Pro app. This is a little bit weird. I might touch on that in a second. But basically, I just want to build a user agent, and this is essentially what you would do in your code as well. So you would get to some point in your test suite where you say, you would say check for an environment variable that says harness active. If that exists, then you know you're running under test more or something like that. And then you would say, I'm going to construct this PayPal web service object, and it is asking me for a user agent. So instead of just giving it a vanilla user agent or letting it create its own, I'm going to give it this test LWP user agent, which as it happens is a subclass of LWP user agent, so that's going to be fine. So I create one here. The default is network fallback 0. So I'll just sort of put this in here for clarity. But essentially what this test object does is it says you can enable network fallback, and that means if you try to reach a host that hasn't been mocked, it will actually go out to the to the world and try and fetch that page as well. So that's a nice thing about that. And so as far as the mocking goes, you just it needs to be PSGI compatible, everything that you do. So you can require HTTP message PSGI, and then at this point I would probably just, if you're doing this in your own code, just require, like I did above here, the test LWP user agent, because you may not have that installed in your production environment, so I just want to grab it when you're in production. And then here, these calls are quite easy. I'm just grabbing the Modulicious apps that I've created here, a Payflow Link app and a Payflow Pro app, and then I'm just calling register PSGI on those. So what that then gives you, you'll see that I'm actually calling 4 URLs, and these top 2 URLs are the production URLs, and the bottom 2 are the sandbox URLs that you get from PayPal. So this would mean that if for some reason your object is set to enable for production, you could still actually mock it going to production without having to fiddle with your URLs. Now, if you want to do this with a Modulicious app, there's kind of a trick to it. Test LWP user agent wants to have a Plaque application, but Modulicious Lite by default doesn't actually give you back a Plaque app. So what it does is it checks for an environment variable called PlaqueEnv. So if you just localize that environment variable before you create the app, then you will get the Plaque application back. If you don't, then you'll get a Modulicious Lite app back, which won't work with this particular module. But the cool thing about doing it this way is that actually does work for other things. So let me just pull up a terminal here. So what you can do is, once you've created your Modulicious apps, you can just create a very basic script like this, and this is essentially 9 lines. And now if you wanted to actually test out your mocked web service, you do something like that. Now you've got the mocked web service running locally on port 3000, and then you can just use curl or whatever you want to use to test that out. Let me just see. I'm just going to post nothing to it, and it'll just give me a not found there, which is actually what we want. So obviously you could do more complicated things, and it'll give you the things you need. But so the neat thing about this is then you can use it in your test suite, but you can also use it just when you're fiddling around. And then what I can do later is I'll be able to expand the mocking a bit so that when people give me certain IDs, maybe I'll send back an error. Maybe I'll send back PayPal transaction. Maybe I'll send back a credit card transaction. So that's basically it. It's quite a simple concept, but it can actually save you a lot of pain and heartache. Especially around these kinds of things where if you're talking about payment, it's generally one of the more important parts of your application. You want to make sure you get that right, and you can allow for a whole bunch of different error conditions. So just as part of this, I'm just going to wrap it up with Let's see if we can go here. Okay. So I just want to show you what the console logger output looks like. This is a lot of stuff probably going to fly by here. Need access to for that. So this one is, the console logger has different levels that you can use. So you can tell it to, and it's just numbers that you pass to it, but it's got a verbosity where you could say, just show me the URLs, or just show me the URLs and the headers, and just show me these sorts of things. But this sort of gives you an idea of, this is the kind of stuff that you would, you might be looking at in Firefox or something like that. But when you use this module, you can do it on the command line. When I initially wrote this, I was having problems troubleshooting an application that was running under mod perl, and it would only run on containers. I wasn't able to run it locally and all this kind of crazy stuff. So it's not like I was able to set up some kind of a network inspector to check things as they went over the wire. This gives you an idea. And then another better example is maybe if you just grab the front page of the New York Times. So there's a lot of stuff here. This is actually inspired by a module of Matt's where he did some console logging for. So let me see if I can get to the top here. There's a lot of stuff on the front page, obviously. It is a big favor. Going as fast as I can. Come on. So I feel like we're getting close. Okay, so you can see there's the GET request here at the top. Then we've got the request headers. And then we've got all the response headers that come back. And then we can see that they're trying to set a cookie. And then we'll just print the raw content. That's helpful. What you can do if you're using this on your own is you can add hooks to it so that you can say every time you go to the content, you can say pull out the top and the bottom. Like, so if you're doing your own application, you can put markers in the headers and the footers, and then just have the regex look for those markers, pop them out, and then you're just looking at stuff that you actually care about. The nice thing that happens here at the bottom is actually pipe everything through links if you have it available, and then it gives you a more viewable version of the HTML. That's that. I think that's essentially what I wanted to cover today. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay, so as far as housekeeping goes, we're still looking for a venue for next month and possibly October?
Yes, and well, for those of you that came in late, Wanda here is going to be doing some construction, and this and the kitchen will be closed next month, possibly October. And after talking to the admin assist here, she said, and you know how construction companies go, so God knows this could go into November. So if anyone is aware of a venue, we're out one right now for September for sure, and particularly in light of Lightning Talks being popular. We might be able to do it here, but the next biggest room is really not that big, and it'll get real hot real fast. The people that we have here right now, it'll be pretty stuffy stuffing us into that room. So, John. So anyone who might know of a venue, please, I'm going to be putting this out on the list, and I'm going to spread it on do a mailing out through meetup.com. I'm very reluctant to use Meetup to mass mail every member of the group, but gotta get something. So, and there are people in the group that are part of and run other groups, so they may be able to help out. So we'll see.
And next month is Lightning Talks, so still looking 5 minutes to talks. And then the month after that will be Mojo, and we actually have 3 speakers lined up for that already, so that's taken care of. So then that just leaves us, we have social in December and some talks for November, so we're pretty much taking care of it. Just look for Lightning Talks, and then if anybody has anything they want to present in November or anything that they want to hear about, then speak up.
Jordan is asking how many seats max.
20.
I have a question. Actually, about your thing.
Okay.
In the what was it, test LWP?
User agent.
Yeah. Are you able to, like, in those little handlers, you actually are able to see you get the request in that map thing somehow, or you can see the query parameters? Or?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you get a request back. But the thing is, I actually didn't tool with that too much because it just was like...
Oh, yeah, it gets really...
Yeah, I was
building up that thing.
Starting to, like, re-implement a framework.
How do you use it in your unit tests? Like, how do you instantiate, do you have your unit test instantiate the server for you automatically, or do you have it running all the time, or what do you?
Well, because it's Plaque, you can actually just sort of run the app in process. So you can, that's what the code does that I was showing you there.
That's what that does.
Yeah, so see, I mean, you could still launch that. I didn't show you, but you can still launch it via PlaqueUp as well if you want. So use PlaqueUp, or you can use Morbo, or you can run it in process. I mean, you could also, there are other ways you could fire up like a Starman server on a different port, and you could do it that way as well. The cool thing about this one is that, say, you can enable that, and you can also enable the console logging at the same time, because all the handlers work together, like they stack. So you could actually make sure that you're mocking and that you're not going out to the network, and it makes it really easy to inspect all the stuff that's going on. And then, you could, if you want to, apply whatever Plaque middleware you want to it as well.
I realize this is a stupid question.
Plaque is just a
spec, really.
It's a spec. I mean, Plaque is the spec for how you interact with a web server. PSGI is the various interfaces that stand between a web server and a Perl web app. So you can switch servers and such by switching what Plaque handler you use. It's very much inspired by WSGI and RAC from the Python.
All right, is anybody going for drinks or food?
Babies. Gotta go.
Okay.
Wife who is tired of babies. Gotta go.
Should have brought the babies with you.
Yeah.
We get nothing done.
Yeah. We give a round of applause there.
Yeah.
Goodbye, Hangout.
Bye-bye.